This is Similarities between HIV and COVID-19 Emerging in Scientific Literature, Part 3. Parts 1 and 2 are below. We covered that various researchers in long COVID and HIV are drawing this comparison, as well as major institutions are looking at immune issues from COVID that potentially could be long-term. And we also covered that HIV primarily infects CD4 T cells. That's the main thing it does. And it turns out that COVID can also infect CD4 T cells. So I'm going to bring in my collaborator, Christina Virgil, to talk about what's the issue with CD4 T cells getting infected and what are the other immune tricks that COVID and HIV both potentially use.
Infection of CD4 T cells ultimately corrupts our immune system's ability to coordinate a response. And that's certainly not the only thing that these two viruses share in common. The most advantageous features of both SARS-CoV-2 and HIV are their immune evasion capabilities. Each of them have several mechanisms that they use to accomplish this. Both of these viruses suppress what's called MHC1. MHC1 is a molecule that alerts our immune system when a cell has been compromised. It presents antigen, and in this case, a piece of the virus, to our T cells. It's sort of like a wanted poster. It signals to specific T cells that they need to destroy any of our cells that have been compromised. Without MHC1, compromised cell can't be destroyed, and therefore the virus continues replicating within it. It continues to do so undetected by the immune system. This can lead to a persistent and chronic infection. Another uncommon feature that these viruses share is their ability to spread from cell to cell using structures called tunneling nanotubes, also called filopodia. These structures allow the virus to propagate other cells without having to re-enter the bloodstream. And that's where our antibodies live, so that's important. Additionally, another important mechanism that both of these viruses use to avoid immune detection is the propensity to mutate. And we've witnessed this over the last several years since COVID's emergence. As they mutate, our antibodies and our T cells that were specifically trained to look for them have more difficulty detecting them and recognizing them when they reappear after several mutations. The immune evasion that I just discussed ultimately results in undetected virus remaining and persisting within our cells. It's a chronic, persistent infection. Many researchers have pointed out that this type of virus, it's an RNA, doesn't really have a propensity to go latent or dormant. They typically have to continually replicate, otherwise it dies. That triggers the release of our T cells, specifically CD4 and CD8 T cells. Our T cells mature in our thymus, which stops growing around puberty and in adulthood begins atrophying. So the number of T cells that we have are finite. But each time these T cells replicate, they have something called telomere shortening that occurs. Ultimately, when these telomeres are too shortened or reduced, no more replication can occur. It's like trying to make something from nothing. And this process is called T cell exhaustion. Ultimately, the T cells dwindle so much in number and become exhausted that they're no longer able to coordinate a response and attack foreign pathogens or even detect cancer. This is immune deficiency. And there is substantial amount of evidence suggesting that SARS-CoV-2 also does this. It might not happen in every single case. If you are able to clear the virus, then you would be able to avoid that happening. But if we're having reinfection upon reinfection, each time you get infected, you increase your risk of this developing. And ultimately, this whole process results in an acquired immune deficiency syndrome, also known as AIDS. There are specific prerequisites that must be matched in order to be diagnosed with this condition, and Jay's going to talk about that with you next.
In part 4, I'll cover what the definition of an acquired immune deficiency is and do we see some of those signs in people post-COVID.